Hello, welcome everybody to this session at the ALT conference. I'm chairing the session, but Sammy's doing all the actual hard work. The session is Asynchronous Study for Adult Learners, and I think we've got about 25 minutes in total. So we'll leave 5 minutes at the end for questions. Do drop any questions or comments into the chat as we go, and I'll note down salient questions, and we'll come back round to them at the end, and we'll try and get through as much as we can. So I don't want to take up any more time. I'm going to hand over to you, Sammy, for the session. Over to you.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here with me today. It's lovely to see you in the chat. Please do leave comments, questions. If any of this resonates with you as we go through, please do share in the chat as well. I'd love to. I've got both screens so I can keep an eye on this. Just a little bit about me. I won't take too long. My name is Sammy. I'm a further education maths lecturer with one eye on EdTech. I've recently just done my Associate CMALT. So if you are at the award ceremony this evening, I will see you there. And I teach maths at a further education college, but I specialise in adult study, adult education, community centre practice, you may know it as well, or community college activities. Before we start, this is a very small scale action research that I undertook. I'm hoping to expand it this year. The same model is happening this year. It starts next week, and it's being expanded to 16 to 19-year-old students as well. I do have a secondary school background as well, so I'm conscious that a lot of this wouldn't necessarily apply in a secondary school model. So I'm keen to see where it sits in the 16 to 19 model as well. And I'm also conscious that this is personal and it's me and my students, and I'm telling their story with you today. But I have gone back post results day to them, and some of them didn't get the grades that they wanted. And with it being teacher assessed grades, that's quite hard to sit through. But we re-interviewed and rediscussed some of this as well post results day, and they still had these things to say, and they wanted to get this message across today as well. So if you can cast your minds back to September last year, we were in the midst of in and out lockdowns, and we were returning to face-to-face teaching. And I was given a choice. I was given a choice to see my students once every 4 weeks face-to-face, or I could see them all the time online. And I thought, well, it's not really my choice to say. I thought I'll ask my students what they want. So the very first session, I brought them all into the building, and we had to have 8 in a room, and we had to bring 8 in a room for an hour, 45 minutes, clean the room, take the 8 out and put the next 8 back in. That's how it worked. And I asked each of them, I said, you have a choice. You can come once every 4 weeks to see me face to face, or we can study together all the time online, and you can pick and choose when you want to study. And overwhelmingly, they all chose to study online independently and asynchronously. There are some synchronous elements, and I will go through these, but that was the choice I had with my physical classroom. And if you're not familiar with adult education, I will share a bit with you now about what my students typically look like. If you can imagine a student who is returning to education, who hasn't got their maths, they're returning to education, perhaps they are a parent, perhaps they are a grandparent, perhaps they are working. They have all these situational factors already going on, and then they're opening themselves up to being vulnerable to returning to education. And the core part of my job is to make them feel safe and welcomed in the space. So let's take a look. I've done a literature review, and this is all available at the end as well. But adults face a range of situational, institutional, and dispositional barriers as they navigate learning opportunities. They've come to us because there is a reason for them to be here. Something has led them to us. Perhaps it is the teaching assistant who wants to be a higher level teaching assistant. Perhaps it is the ambulance driver that wants to be a paramedic, and both of whom were in this cohort. They cannot progress in their careers without this magic maths. So they open themselves up and they make themselves vulnerable to coming in to our wonderful world of education. But typically, childcare costs and the costs of learning and the time costs of travelling to and from our community centres as well for their education make this a difficult transition as well for them. Online learning gives an opportunity for adults to engage with the education at a time convenient to them. They have time to think about what it is they want to do and how they want to engage. And we all know that we get much more out of education when we are active. Obviously, you're very passive at the moment. I'm talking at you. But if you are actively involved in your learning, there is a much more positive experience for you. When I moved to asynchronous study, I was conscious that I wanted to build this active element in as well. And I chose to focus on asynchronous because the literature was telling me that students have time to consider their responses. Researchers found that they engage in a more meaningful dialogue, but that informal learning can occur through alternative communication channels, which supports a deeper learning experience because of the flexibility of the asynchronous approach. And that students take more responsibility for their learning when they're in an asynchronous environment, developing their student agency. My alternative communication channels and how the active element came to the fore for my students was an online chat space built within the domain, so bound by the rules of the college system. And in there, they could share what was going on for them, how they were feeling, how the tasks were happening. So although they were studying at their own pace, some of them would get a sneaky peek of what was coming up, but also they could be prepared for how long a task would take. But that peer support became invaluable to them. We could see in the conversations, one student was having a problem with her daughter who was teething. Now, although that's not related to her learning, that is a barrier to her learning. And another student was able to offer a remedy to solve that for her. That's the peer support, and that's the level that these informal communication channels can create. The pressure to engage was lifted for them. They didn't have to join in the online chat. They didn't have to join in with any live sessions either. There was a synchronous element that went along too. And it was more of a mop-up revision session, not a teaching session as such. And they felt that they could dip in and dip out as they went through. We know from the literature that peers can motivate and inspire learners to even progress their study beyond the current qualification. That feeling of euphoria when you achieve and you've achieved with your peers, you then want to take that into your next qualification. And the studies have also told us that students spend longer engaging with material in an asynchronous manner than in a traditional face-to-face environment. And studies show us that this means that their metacognitive abilities are increased. But this does come with a cautionary tale of teacher well-being. So as much as the well-being of the students, of the adults is being catered for in that they can do this asynchronously, the pressure is lifted for them, they can have peer support, they are being well looked after, this can come at the cost of teacher well-being. Again, the literature tells us that teachers invest far more time in creating online learning materials, and I think we've all felt that recently. And it also requires a significant time investment in course design as well. But there is a cautionary tale from the literature, and it certainly happened to me, in that online transactions can permeate outside traditional lesson hours, causing an impact on teacher workload. They might be new to these technologies as well, and then they seek teacher support. Well, that then permeates outside the traditional lesson as well. So we have to manage that when we're looking at this. This happened to me at the very beginning. When they were in there was lots of pressures on my time and demand to come back to them with responses. But once they were settled, once they had that peer support established, it didn't permeate for me. They were just the set days and the set time that I looked after them. And they knew that I would respond to messages in the chat when I was at my desk on these days. And I think managing expectations is a key factor in this. What I wanted to do when I made this material asynchronous, I wanted to make sure it was web-based, on demand, and that there was a synchronous option as well. Web-based is a key thing for me. I'm a huge fan of the GIST digital insight surveys, and the statistics in that of 15% of students accessing things on their mobile data, most students using a mobile phone as their device of choice. Therefore, web-based has to be a key consideration of the activities that you're choosing when you're doing this course design online, especially asynchronous, because you're not there to support them if they have any issues. Making it web-based as well meant that it was on demand for them. And this voluntary check-in of this synchronous. So they would be given the materials at the beginning of the week, and this synchronous option happened once a week, and it was just me in a very passive environment for them, just tackling misconceptions that they'd given me ahead of time, and then they could respond in the chat of how they felt that it had gone, and then they could stay on as well. I also wanted to include wellbeing check-ins for them. So they also had 15-minute bookable slots with me once a week. And each of them were in waves from the very beginning of when they were brought into the building. So wave 1 would have four slots available to them, and there were 8 students in that group. And then it would be another 4 weeks before that they got their next wave of 1-to-1 slots that they could book with me. So you're probably wondering now, she's talked for 10 minutes, what does a lesson look like? Well, I'm going to get one of my students to tell you. And I'm going to read it aloud just for accessibility. So Sammy set us going with enabling us to access pre-recorded videos of the lesson and setting all the work across a PowerPoint, talking us through each step. I know it sounds dull, but it does get better. This student found it absolutely fantastic. It enabled them to work at their own pace at their own time. Sammy set a time frame to ensure the work set each week was completed for the following week's lesson, giving them a full week to complete the work. And they were also given the option to join a class call each week to discuss the work and discuss any complications to make sure they fully understood. And I can see Carla saying in the chat, managing expectations is one of the most important things. It really is, Carla. So I gave them a full week to do the work. I didn't care when they did the work, as long as it was handed in by that time. That was it for me. Now, the pre-recorded videos over the PowerPoint, what I was recording there was the teacher talk elements, the teacher talk elements that I would have done in the classroom. That 5-10 minutes at the board when I would just explain something, perhaps model something, and then set them going on the work, I was just capturing that in a video and then letting them go with the work. This was given to me by an adult female student who was working full-time. I think it's really important to stress that if she's working full-time, to give her a full week of the work, again, it eases that pressure, lightens that cognitive load. So this is an example of it, and it's built in Google Forms. It's very crude in its design. I didn't want to complicate things. So they reflect on the learning intention, they get to watch the video, then they get an online task that is web-based, and then they indicate their score and upload their evidence. There is no logging into a learner management system. Controversial, I know. But what I found with learner management systems, and I'm a Google certified educator, trainer, coach, innovator, all of them. What I wanted to do was make this as simple as possible for my students. Each of these aspects as well has a choice as well, using branching logic or go to section based on answer, depending if you're an MS Forms or a Google Forms user. So they had a choice after they'd watched my video, do they want another video? When they did the task, if it didn't go well or they didn't like the task, they had a choice to do another task. And then they would reflect again on how their learning intentions, they'd gone against the learning intentions. They didn't have to sign into anything. This is all clicking a link, watching a video that was open to anyone with the link, clicking a link to a web-based self-marking activity. Obviously, the time taken for me to curate that and prepare those was challenging, but it's done now, and we've got it. And then they would take a photograph either of their handwritten notes or a screenshot of their work and upload it into there. That then comes to me as a Google Sheet, all nice and neat, and then I can work through there. And obviously I color-coded it, conditional formatted it. There's an option that if they felt that they were struggling, it would just go red, and then I would get a notification as well that someone needed some help. that was it. As simple as it could be. I can see there's lots of questions in the chat, so I will come back to those. Did I have a visualizer for writing mathematics? I did. I've made every type of visualizer going. And I now have a drawing tablet, and I use a web-based interactive whiteboard. Math whiteboard is my whiteboard of choice for doing my maths. And I wanted to share with you an example of the chat. So this is the synchronous element. So the synchronous element would be whatever we'd covered during the week. I would just go through some questions, and then they would then come along and dip in and dip out. I'd say 20 minutes we're going to do these ones, 20 minutes we're going to do these ones. Come along whenever you want. So some would come at the beginning and some would come 20 minutes in. And this is just an example of the chat. Is it 6:30 again tonight? And then a screenshot of their question. Could someone please remind me again? And then another student, for the first one, you need to subtract the powers. And the next one, oh, I got that one. It's the next one I'm unsure of. I'm not doing the legwork there. Me as the teacher, I'm sat back watching this, and they're helping each other. It certainly did develop their agency. So that was quite a lot about the literature, quite a lot about what I did. And I thought it was really important to hear what the students would like to say. I would like to point out as well that I did leave the organisation partway through. So I left the organisation, but I did leave them with these lessons ready. So before I left the organisation, I completed the action research, and I asked them, when do they do their study? Did they do it synchronously at a set time or asynchronously? And 80% of them said, and again, this is very small scale, but 80% of them said they do it at their own time. But then I asked if they had caring responsibilities, and 80% of them did. And so I'm interested to see if there's a correlation between that this year as I go into my next term with a new cohort. And then when do you study on your course? And I'm still thinking about these 80% with caring responsibilities. 70% study in the evening, 20% study in the weekend, and the 10% study in the day. Now this 10%, I know who this 10% is, and that is because they work full-time, but they work night shift. So majority of the students were choosing evenings and weekends. So another student gave me these comments here. As a mum of two working in a primary school during the pandemic, this was an amazing approach to take. It enabled me to juggle work, home life, and complete my work at a pace without feeling under pressure to get it done, putting zero pressure on us. I think as a teacher, that's what we want all the time, isn't it? A student to say that they felt zero pressure. And this was a male student. You can pick it up and leave it. It can be your bedtime reading. It doesn't have to be 3 hours done by a set time. Because of the pandemic, I felt safer. And I introduced at the beginning that vulnerability of my students. For me, this means the world that this student feels safer. They feel safer because of the pandemic, and they feel safer because of the vulnerability of returning to education. They also said you were supported even without a teacher. We had each other to bounce off, and I've shown you some of the informal chat. And then this bit, nothing changed after you left me. You did it all for us, things carried on. So even after I left the organisation, the lessons just carried on for them. Overwhelmingly, students preferred to study at their own time. Students valued the one-to-one elements and the optional drop-ins, the option to book in quality time with me. I've got another quote here for you. My teacher is very good at recording video teaching and explaining all the skills we need. By paying attention to it, I found it very helpful. Never thought online is going to be a thing, but I am enjoying it. So we've got students feeling zero pressure, enjoying it, and they have each other to bounce off. But most importantly of all, they feel safer. I think this is a really valid point and something that I just wanted to end with. And I'm going to read it aloud just for accessibility. I also think even without the pandemic and going forward, this approach would work fantastic for returning students who have children and work commitments, etc., to ensure they can complete the education they want and feel like they are managing it and not becoming swamped, taking on extra work while continuing their own home work life. I put my students' well-being at the heart of what I was doing. I created a model that let them choose when they wanted to study, to manage their well-being, to look after themselves. And I created informal chat spaces for them to support each other. And from that point in, they just ran with it and it worked. I can actually say for the first time she made maths enjoyable. And I just want to end on this point. Adult education is just that. They are adults. And I think all too often we try and apply a model that we've either used with schools or we've used with 16 to 19 cohorts. And we don't take account of the barriers that our adults face returning to education. And we need to just put at the front of our minds, they're adults, they can do this if we create the right conditions for them to thrive in. If you want to read more about this or read the typed up report, it is on my website, which is whatthetrig.co.uk. And I think that should be about time for questions. Thank you.
Hello. Yes, there is time for questions because you run perfectly to time. Thank you for that. Obviously, we've had people chatting away there. So I'm gonna sort of go backwards. There's Emily there asking, did you find that monitoring your peer support platform also took up a lot of your time? So I think there's something interesting in terms of student well-being, staff well-being, and all of those kind of structures.
Yeah, definitely. Immediately, I wanted to be in all their conversations, and I'd be sat there going, and I was responding. And this is really old school, but do you remember when you did your teacher training and they said, you need to stop doing the talking and let them do the talking? And your observer would remind you of that all the time. And I just treated it like that. And so I would leave it. And then when I felt it had been left long enough, I would respond. And in the end, we came to an agreement where I set office hours of when I would be in their chat space. Obviously, I was in their chat space more than that, but they could expect a response from me during these hours when I was in their chat space.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, there's been a bit of chat about how the technology tends to push expectations of response times to more and more immediate. I mean, how did you find it got leaky? Did people what did you do when people operated outside of the expectations you were setting?
Yeah, I think an example of that, without being too graphic, is safeguarding referrals with adults are huge where we are. And I would have to be on there because those safeguarding issues would be coming via private messages and expecting an immediate response. And then you've got the burden of dealing with that. And then all the other things that are expecting an immediate response as well. And I got some really good advice from the safeguarding officer who said, you just need to shut off and you just need to say, these are the hours, unless it is extremely urgent. And then he was great. And he was like, just pass all the safeguarding to me and I will take that off your desk. But it's more from me as well, because I want to be that caring person, because that's why we are teachers. We want to care. We care so much. And I think we just I wanted to care so much that I would forget to look after myself. And so I had to be very, very strict on that. But the pressures are there and it does leak. 100% it does. But I have a sanction and reward system for myself. If I do good time management of my own skills, I give myself a little treat, and if I don't, I get really cross with myself and I don't let myself do something else. So yeah, whatever works for you.
I think it's just lovely that you call it a sanction and reward system. I think that's funny.
It's the old high school teacher.
Yeah. Wow, I'm imagining you've got a star chart up on the wall.
I have just there.
There we go. There it is. So there you go, everybody who's in the session. That's how you do it. Just make yourself a star chart. That's the secret. I've got an interesting question for Sonia here. Yes, could be pronounced like that. Did you do anything specific to encourage students to engage in the informal chat? Because it's one thing to set an expectation. It's a bit like you can't just go, okay, everybody start informal chat and go. So, I mean, how did you build that kind of culture up?
Yeah, I think great question. I think I put a lot of effort into building community at the start. So when we did our live face-to-face and I gave them the information, I had like little jokey conversations with them that sort of told them that I wasn't a traditional stand at the front boring teacher. And I started the informal chat space by asking, like, what's your favorite film, or what's everyone doing, or is anybody going to, and there was a local event, I was like, is anyone going to this event, and all those sorts of things. And it just broke down those barriers and brought people in. And I always say there's a difference between saying you're open and actually bringing people in. So what are you doing to bring people in? And those that weren't coming in, I would private message and say, hey, you've not said anything in the group chat yet. Are you coming in?
Okay. So I'm just going to finish off with a sort of final commenty thought, because, and I just want to know your feeling on it. It kind of brings together a few things that are happening in chat, I hope, is to what extent do you think your students perceived all of the community building stuff and the informal stuff and the peer stuff as anything to do with teaching and learning, or not?
I think they didn't until I sat them down and pointed it out to them. I think they were just having a lovely time. They were very shocked I didn't turn up for drinks on results day. They couldn't quite understand why I wasn't there, because for them, that was their community and that was their activities that they were doing. And they, the teething remedy example, there were 100 other examples of them helping each other out. I can see that as them overcoming their barriers to learning, but they just saw that as making friends and building connections.
Yeah, no, yeah, okay, that's really interesting, because I think one of the challenges probably for everyone in the session is how you build all of that community building work and all the informal stuff into perceptions of your actual job and what the job of being a teacher is. Whereas I think sometimes it's seen as what you have to do before you can do the teaching, which I don't really believe in, because I think it's all one thing. So
absolutely, it has to come to both. But I would just point people to Dr. Lou Mycroft's keynote coming up in the week, and the values-led practice of joy, and that's a key influence on my work as well.
I could see that. Thank you. And that was a lovely, joyful, upbeat session. And we're 2 minutes over. I've been reliably informed.
Yeah, so sorry everybody.
Thank you to you, Sammy, for such a clear and concise session, and a really positive session as well, which is always welcome in these times. And thank you to everyone for contributing as well. We'll see you in the next bit, I guess, and this will be available as a recording. Cheers, all.